cultural problems. My endeavor has been to find my place in the Muslim community, to bring my children and my family with me. So I told them a good title would be for that, Not Without My Children. Reminded me somehow of the same. When Brother Hammett asked me to give my State of the Convert address, he asked me to give one of these just about every year, I told him, Hammett, I'm tired of giving speeches. I don't want to give any more speeches. Just let me crawl into my corner. Let me just be a regular, everyday Muslim. I'm through giving speeches. He said, well, you know, people are interested in what you have to say, etc., etc. I said, why? I mean, I am, compared to all the rest of the Muslims in our community, I am definitely a square peg. I mean, my point of view has to be probably the most peculiar, most singular point of view of any Muslim in the community. Just to explain to you why I say that, almost everybody reacts that way anyway. Once I was interviewing for a job in Saudi Arabia. I just wanted to go there for a year, take a year's leave the University of Kansas, teach in Dhahran and UPM for a year. And I was discussing this with the dean of UPM, University of Petroleum and Minerals, down in, not too far from here, down in Texas, Houston, Texas. And I walked in, I showed him my resume. You have to put down your family background, your wife's background, etc., how many children you have, your religion, etc., your education. He's looking at my application, and I'm sitting there in front of him. He's looking at it again. He starts looking at it kind of funny. He looks at me, looks at that. Now I'm looking at him, wondering, what's going on here? He said, what's the matter? And I said, I should be asking you. You look very surprised. He said, well, what do you think? How many times do you think I interview people like you? He said, blonde-haired, blue eyes, American, professor, a Muslim, married to a lady from Saudi Arabia. He said, I don't think there's another person that fits that description anywhere in the world. And that sort of presents my dilemma. I mean, my circumstances are so vastly different in my perspective than from almost any member of our community that I feel that, you know, the problems that I face, the issues that concern me, the dilemmas that I try to tackle, my personal struggle is so very different from most of the other Muslims that what difference does it make whether, you know, we know of that or not? Because it really doesn't fit into the general pattern. But nonetheless, Brother Hammett told me that it would not be a bad idea, and hopefully in the effort to serve our community and to serve God, here I stand today. Hopefully, I keep telling Hammett for the last time. I just want to go back and write. I don't like talking so much, especially since I ramble so much. I'm a rambling sort of speaker. Well, so let me begin. I guess if I had to characterize my childhood, I'll try to sum this up fairly quickly, in 2 words. If I was only allowed 2 words to recall my childhood, the 2 words I would use would be, number 1, fear, and number 2, violence. Because when I think back on those days when I was growing up, those were the most powerful feelings that I was experiencing. For one thing, those were just turbulent times in America, the late 60s and early 70s. We had race riots. We had a president killed. We had presidential candidates killed. We had president kicked from office, a vice president kicked from office. Martin Luther King got assassinated. This country seemed like it was going bananas. We had underground terrorist groups. I can't remember their names now, but the one that captured Patty Hearst, the SLA, I think it was called, or something like that, Symbionese Liberation Army. We had the Black Panthers, I remember that. I remember we had the Weathermen. They were planting bombs. They were capturing buildings. People were being killed. In city streets like mine, we had burnings and lootings and race riots and gang fights. The name of my gang, the gang I was associated with, was called the TC Gang, stands for Telephone Company. We used to fight. We used to hang around down by the telephone company. And we would fight other gangs, and people would get hurt. A couple of people got killed. Some got in prison. But they were just extremely violent times. And of course, we always had the specter of the Vietnam War before us every night on television. The endless body counts night after night, hundreds on each side getting killed, body bags taking our young men home. And I was getting ever closer to that age when I would have to be drafted into the Vietnam conflict. So, life was just extremely violent, and it was an extremely chaotic time in America. But the worst violence and the worst fear I knew by far, and I won't go into detail, was the violence and the fear I knew at home. In some ways, that violence and that fear was so much worse because it penetrated so much more deeply and it left scars that seemed so much more permanent than the type of violence and fear that we were facing in our society. In any case, I guess I obtained a very jaded and pessimistic and cynical view of life. I thought life was nothing but suffering and torment and struggle. I came to hate so many things. I came to even hate the virtues. When people talked about love, compassion, mercy, forgiveness, and all the rest of the virtues, generosity, I thought those are just the fictitious fabrications of our minds. Something that we just invent to give ourselves some legitimacy, when actually all human beings are after is money, power, greed, selfishness, lust, their own material benefits. We're all struggling to survive, and we're all beating each other to the whatever we're searching for, whatever we're after. And I thought all those things, love, compassion, they just don't really exist. We just make them up in our mind. Got to the stage when I couldn't even say love. Oh, I would say it to a girlfriend or two over the years, or, to someone else if I felt, a relative if I felt I had to, but I certainly didn't feel it. I just felt that it was the thing to do at that time, the expected thing. I came not to trust anyone and not to care about anyone. I just wanted to get through this life and get it over with, and if it got too difficult along the way, I thought I'd pull the plug. I didn't trust anybody. Except, there was one exception. And of course, that was my mother. Because of all the people I ever knew, that was the only person that I knew that I could count on. That would stick by me through thick or thin, that was always there. My mother was a very special woman. She was a strong woman, she was a loving woman, she was a gentle woman, and she was a religious woman. I didn't believe in her religion. I became an atheist. But I felt a little bit envious of her because I felt she was one of those few deluded people that actually believed in these religions that we fabricated. Believed in it so strongly that it actually affected the type of person she was and how she related to other people. And I used to wish that I could brainwash myself into accepting those teachings. But I couldn't. I saw too much violence in the world around me. I saw too much suffering in my life and in so many other lives. And I thought, how can an all-merciful, all-loving, all-powerful God, who had the ability to pop us into heaven, who had the ability to create angels, but yet who created us, how can he create such a flawed creature, such a corrupted creature, and then put him in an environment where he could wreak such destruction and suffering like he does here on earth? Why didn't he just pop us into heaven in the first place? They used to tell me, he wants to save you. He wants to save you. Just do this, he will save you. I used to say, well, let him save me now, for God's sakes. Here I am. I didn't put myself in this predicament. Why am I here? So I became a very strong and committed atheist. But nonetheless, the religiosity of my mother, I think, did affect me. And I was always impressed by religious people, the few I really met in my life, the few I ever really felt were religious. But I was always also quite interested in the religions of others. I don't know, it was a fascination. And when I think about why I was always fascinated about that, I think it goes back to just... and whenever I'd study another religion, I'd always think of my mother in mind and how its universal teachings were reflected in the way she lived. I looked at Eastern religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, The Hare Krishnas I thought about for a while, but that seemed too weird, strange for me. But I looked at them. And one thing I did was also converse quite a bit. Studied those religions and conversed quite a bit with people from those religions. And I found that when I conversed with various Muslim students, not Muslim students, students from all over the world, and met students from various backgrounds, I felt that the students from the Far Eastern religions, the ones I just mentioned, although they didn't have many answers, and although they often confessed that they couldn't deal much with the type of questions I had, the ambiguity, the uncertainty of their responses, their own self-doubts, made me at least appreciate and respect their point of view. Sometimes not having an answer is better than giving a foolish answer. And so rather than try to answer my questions, they would simply express their point of view, what they believe, without trying to really approach the type of questions that I had. And I sort of appreciated and respected it. It didn't compel me to believe in their systems because they didn't answer my needs and my questions. But nonetheless, I developed a healthy respect for them and appreciated their systems of thought. The one exception, of course, were the Muslims. Unlike all those people I've just mentioned, the Muslims seem to have many, many answers. Anytime you ask them a question, they always seem to shoot out an answer. And although they had many, many answers, I could never relate to them. I found that of all the people that I discussed religion with, they by far, at least from my Western standpoint, made the least sense. I'm not saying they do make the least sense, but from somebody from my type of background and my upbringing and my past, it's extremely difficult to relate to. Oftentimes I found their answers strange and absurd. I found that we would get into roadblocks time and time again, get caught into corners that we couldn't get out. After so many conversations with Muslims, that was the only religion I never explored beyond the level of conversation, because it just seemed to me to be so filled with so many contradictions, filled with so many problems, that I just couldn't take it seriously, so I pretty much ignored it. I graduated, got my PhD, went to California to teach at the University of San Francisco, fell in with some very nice Muslim friends. And to tell you the truth, the one thing I have to say for Muslims, and I didn't say what I just said to put down, I'm not saying they don't make sense, they just didn't make sense to me. The one thing I really appreciated about them was their kindness. Of all the people in the world, I really found that the Muslims were, at least the ones I met, truly kind, generous, hospitable people. There was something about them that attracted to them. In some sense, I think it was almost like their innocence, their naivety. You know, other people, when I spoke to them, seemed to understand the questions I was asking and the difficulties involved. The Muslims didn't. There was sort of a naive, almost childlike quality about them. It's like they were unaware of any difficulties with life. They just lived it and went along and got by and enjoyed it. They had a very positive attitude towards life. None of this brooding pessimism that we have so much in the West. It was attractive to me. I found it quite attractive, quite interesting. And I enjoyed their company. I tried to avoid asking too many questions. I didn't want it to ruin our friendships. But finally, with one Muslim family one night, we got into a real deep discussion. And I told them about my problems with life, told them about problems with human suffering, told them about my problems with the idea of God. They asked me why I was an atheist, so I explained it. We'd get into discussions. They would go nowhere. We'd go down this alley. It'd get trapped. Go down this one. Run into another trap. Finally, the next day, one of them brought me a copy of the Quran to my office at the University of San Francisco. Put it on my desk. I looked at it. And then I got this. I was told this. You know, I can't answer your questions. Personally, I've never even thought about them. As a matter of fact, I don't think any of us ever really thought about them. But I do know this. If there is at all an answer somewhere to the type of questions you have, I know, and you have any chance at all of finding it, I know you will find it here. And I looked and I just sort of shook my head. And he told me, please, read it. I said, okay, I'll look at it. No, make sure you read it. Because if I know one thing else, you're suffering. And you're confused. And you're tormented. And if you have any hope at all, I think you have it here. And I didn't know whether to be grateful or to be angry. I didn't know whether to be moved or to punch this person. I don't know if I was insulted or somebody was reaching out to me. But in any case, I thought to myself, if the time comes, I'll look at it someday. I don't know what spurred me on, but a few weeks later I did look at the Quran. As I was picking it up, I was thought, what a strange idea. To hand somebody a copy of your scripture and say, this is the way you're going to learn about my religion. I mean, think about it. I mean, would a Hindu or a Buddhist hand you a copy of one of their scriptures, just give you the scripture and say, here, this will answer all your questions? I doubt it, because when you think about the scriptures of other cultures, they're so culturally fixed. They so much reflect the culture from which they came. The language, the logic, which might not be Aristotle's logic, which we sort of inherit in the West. The logic, the terminology, the language, the experience behind it is so foreign to you if you come from the West that the worst thing you could do is hand somebody a scripture from that culture. I mean, could you imagine if you pulled somebody from China? This is a true story. Somebody from China was given a copy of the New Testament. The Christian said, read this, please, and you'll understand the truth. The guy did. Go ahead and read it. He read about 50, 60 pages into it. Then one night at a dinner at the university, when the different foreign students were together, all these Chinese students were laughing over at another table. What were they laughing about? The scripture, the New Testament they just read. They thought it was laughable. Because they couldn't relate to it. It was so strange to them, a whole different perspective. I thought, what a strange idea to hand somebody a copy of the Quran and expect him from the West to relate to this document, I thought, from the Middle East, from 1,400 years ago. And yet, when I picked up the Quran, I felt like somebody had written this for me, to me. You know, every generation of Muslims has felt that the Quran was particularly suited to the mentality of its time. You know, if you read the scholars, they could always tell you how this Quran is particularly suited to the situation and the mentality of the people of their time. Well, you'll find that Western converts to Islam are no different. How many of us read the Quran and didn't have any trouble relating to it at all, felt that it was particularly suited to our mentality? You know, when you read the Quran for the first time, it's a strange experience. It's not like you're just reading, it's like you're communicating with the divine word. It's like you're having a veritable dialogue with the Quran. It seems to anticipate your moods, your situation, your anxieties, your fears, your problems, and start addressing those right away. And then you start reacting to the verses. And then the next verses seem to pick up your train of thought. And then you start reacting to those. And the next verses seem to anticipate your reaction and keep taking you along, as if the author somehow knew the direction you would go. Page by page, line by line, the Quran seems to be anticipating the direction you're going and responding to that and taking you in a certain direction. It's almost impossible for me to describe how others have felt that communication from outside my culture. But for those of us who have become Muslim, through our reading of the Quran, that was a dialogue, that was a communication that takes place at the deepest level of being, deepest, truest level of being. It's a communication from the very essence of what we are, a communication of attributes, of love, mercy, compassion, forgiveness, kindness, wisdom, meeting together, perfect and imperfect, human and divine, creating and created, giving and receiving, of God and man, coming together in a terrific and tremendous and powerful encounter when one reads the Quran. How many of us who read it for the first time when we were adults as Americans recall that experience? What's the first question you have when you pick up a scripture? Well, what's it going to guide me towards? The Quran promises you in the first surah that it'll guide you. Whatever is your need, it will guide you. How will it guide you? You open up the second surah, Alif Lam Mim. This is the book wherein, no doubt, is the guidance for those who just made that prayer. All right? Who made Al-Fatiha, a prayer for guidance. And then as you read on, what's the first question that every Westerner has in his mind? What's the purpose of life? Why are we here? Why is there suffering? How many of your friends that are agnostics or atheists have put that question to you? And the Quran very quickly takes it up. The Quran, in the most dramatic way, takes it up. It has the angels in heaven, ask their creator, why create this corrupt being who will spread violence and shed blood? Why? When you could create us. It's the Western dilemma put before the reader in the most dramatic way, in the most beautiful and concise way. Out of the mouth of the angels comes the atheist objection. And then the Quran begins to give you an answer, piece by piece, verse by verse. An answer begins to unfold, and the Quran will guide you to it, if that's what you seek. In the second surah, Surah Al-Baqarah, it doesn't complete the answer. It doesn't take you to the end of that journey, but it begins it. It gives you enough to capture your attention, to excite your intrigue. But the Quran never gives you a complete and full discourse, just, like as if I was writing a thesis. It interweaves its themes. Because all these things, the Quran is telling us, are connected. You don't separate them out and dissect them and to put them, this one over here and this theme over here. They're all interconnected and interrelated. So throughout it, it's interrelating its themes. Okay, so you get something of an idea. The Quran has sort of captured your attention on those ultimate questions that so many of us have. And then you read on, and some ideas naturally pop into your head. Okay, I've just heard about the story of Adam. What's the natural question? Well, where does the Quran fit in the Judeo-Christian tradition? It's a natural question. Then Surah Al-Baqarah immediately takes up that issue. It starts talking about the children of Israel, their history. And then the people of the book, the communities that evolved from all that, the two major communities that evolved from that. Then it talks about Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ishmael and the establishment of the Kaaba, and how that's the pure faith, the true faith that all prophets preached, and that Islam is the restoration of that true, pure faith. Puts it all in perspective. The very question one of us, Americans, would naturally have. And then we would naturally ask, once we get that general idea, well, let me see now. What about all those things I hear in the news? The treatment of women is Islam, Muslim practices, the pilgrimage, etc., etc., etc. What about Muslim practices in general? And the rest of Surah Al-Baqarah starts talking about that. Men's and women's roles, families' roles, rules and regulations, fighting in a just cause, not committing aggression, etc., etc., etc. There's no compulsion in religion, and on and on. Right? The very type of things that would naturally come to a person's mind when he first approaches this religion are immediately put forth for him in the second surah. By the end of the second surah, he's already obtained a fairly good knowledge of the direction that Islam takes towards life. He's obtained a summary knowledge of the faith. Of course, many questions have arisen. He'd like to know more, he or she. More details, perhaps. He'd like to see things elaborated on. The rest of the Quran will elaborate on those details, on those themes. The second surah, the third surah, will talk primarily about the history of religions. In fact, I can't remember now. What was the third surah? Al-Imran. We'll talk again about the subject of Islam's place in the religious history, and also about fighting in a just cause. The fourth surah will talk largely about women's issues and families' issues. The fifth surah will come back to the question of the people of the book, how they corrupted the religion and how Islam came to purify and perfect religion and restore it to its proper place. These themes will be interwoven throughout the Quran as you go deeper and deeper, and it'll give more and more details. The stories will get lengthened. the stories of the prophets will become lengthened. The parables will grow. The Quran provides more and more parables as you get to the middle of the Quran. The style of the Quran, the meter, the rhythm, the poetic, not the poetic, but the literal beauty of it grows and grows and starts to obtain sort of a rhapsodic quality as you merge to the middle of the Quran. It's growing in intensity. Not just intensity of expression. Not just that it's focusing on many different themes that it introduced you to in the first surah. Not just because it's starting to concentrate more and more and more as you go to it on you and your relationship to God, and other individuals and their relationship to God, the human individual and his relationship to God, the many signs that manifest God's creative activity in the universe and nature, the beautiful and powerful parallels that are coming at you. But even the music of the Quran, if you'll allow me, is growing in intensity and beauty as you move to the middle of the Quran. By the time you come to the end of the Quran, what do you have there? Now as you come to the end of the Quran, it is you, the reader, and God facing each other in the end of the Quran. It's the reader and his relationship to God which is the subject. The rules and regulations are put back. We no longer are given any more rules and regulations. Right? That's not the concern here. Now the concern is the choice that ultimately faces you as you reach the end of the Quran. Heaven and hell are brought together as you move towards the end of the Quran. This life and the next life and their organic relationship. This is stressed. The last day and the last hour. This creation and its end. The many signs of God and how this will all come to an end. All this great apocalyptic cataclysm. All of this is merging together, coming together and focusing on one supreme, single, ultimate choice that the reader must face and the Quran demands of him as he moves closer and closer to the end of the Quran. Till finally the Quran tells him the words that his tortured soul longs to say. The Quran will put in his very heart and try to connect him and shock him to the deep inner soul of his that's crying out for what it needs. It'll tell him, say, He is God, the one and only, the eternally sought by all. A few verses later, say, I seek protection. And believe me, you feel like you need protection. I seek protection in the Lord of every new day's dawn. Say, I seek protection in the Lord of mankind. As if God is reaching out from you, from heaven, and revealing it to you in these words that are right before you. Just say it. It's as if God is calling out to you. Just say it and I will come to you. Just say it and I will comfort you and I will protect you. Just turn to me and say it, and I will shower you with my love, mercy, and protection, and you will experience it to ever greater degrees. Just turn to me. Just say it. What time is it? 12:21. Many of us have reached that point and have faced that decision and stood on that bridge of indecision. Have stood on that bridge of indecision between acceptance and rejection, between our worldly needs, deliberating between our worldly needs and our ultimate needs. Many of us have been frozen there. Not a believer, not a disbeliever anymore, just suspended at a point where we just couldn't make a choice. Many of us have known the agony of that indecision. Have tossed and turned at night, looking at the ceiling, have thought about our sanity, have wondered about our future, have been haunted by those verses. And some of us have stayed with that agony and then finally walked away, and others who faced those verses and faced that Quran knew the ecstasy of surrender. And knew the joy and the peace that comes with throwing themselves into that ocean of mercy that could only come from God, of reaching out with open arms and running to their Creator. I decided, after I was struggling with that choice, that I needed to talk to somebody. So I went to the masjid at the University of San Francisco. I told myself I wasn't going in there to do anything rash. I was just going to talk. And 30 minutes later, I emerged from the masjid. And if I came to realize something very quickly, Middle Eastern way of thinking and the Western way of thinking and the Muslim way of thinking and the Western way of thinking are two different worlds. You often hear an expression in the West that, just here's a simple example, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, the ancient Muslim scholars used to say, and Arab writers used to say, that a single word has tremendous power and is capable of producing 1,000 images in men's minds. So in the West, you see the religious art, for example, expressed in beautiful, bold, visual imagery. Well, for the Muslim, their most religious art is expressed in what else but words? Beautiful letters of the Arabic alphabet, in interweaving and beautiful patterns reaching up to infinity towards the heaven. And if you look at the beauty very carefully, if you penetrate through and search for the inner meaning, for the truth hidden behind the beauty, there you'll find verses from the Quran and prayers to God and eternal truths. Because for the Muslim, this is what life is all about. It's beautiful and it's dazzling, but if you penetrate it and look carefully enough into it, you will find an inner truth behind it. This tremendous power of words, I learned that day I went to the masjid. I walked out a half hour later, and I suddenly discovered just how great a single word could have on people. You see, that day I accepted a word into my life that got a tremendous, unexpected reaction from myself. Somehow somebody heard about the designation I accepted, and it spread throughout this Catholic university I was teaching like wildfire. Everybody knew about it. Friends I had were suddenly distancing themselves from me and becoming acquaintances. Acquaintances were now somewhat like enemies. People were scowling at me at the halls. People I would say good morning to would now just walk straight by. Students, I would walk down the hall and hear students saying, he's the one, that's the one who did it. Yeah, did you hear about that? Other students from the Middle East, from Muslim countries, were coming up to me, congratulating me. For what? I couldn't figure out why. They were congratulating me left and right. This was a personal choice, I thought. What did it have to do with them? But nonetheless, in the eyes of some, I was some sort of hero. In the eyes of others, I was some sort of traitor to my country. My parents, when they heard about the news, I had to call them. I was a nervous wreck. I had to tell them what I did. Just get it over with, I thought. I called them. My mom exploded. My dad, of course, he really exploded. It took me 4 or 5 weeks to tell them about that my choice was an intelligent one, an irrational one, as well as a spiritual one. And I think I did a good job of convincing them that. Of course, you know that single word that changed me so dramatically in the eyes of others was the simple word Muslim. I took on the word Muslim into my life. I became a Muslim. And the strange thing was, I thought everyone else was going crazy. I mean, I didn't feel like I changed. I was the same old person I always was. Jeff Lang. I'm teaching my classes. I don't feel any different. I didn't suddenly become some sort of saint. I didn't become perfect. I didn't become holy. I didn't become great or even very good. Still had so many weaknesses, so many insecurities, so many scars from my past. I wasn't any different. But now everybody was reacting as if in a single half hour I had suddenly become something I never was. They all thought I was going berserk. I thought all of them were. But over the months I thought back on it and I tried to think, can 60 million Frenchmen be wrong? I mean, if everyone sees you as somehow dramatically different, maybe you did change in some way, just you weren't conscious of it. So I tried to review what happened, what did I do, in what way did I change? Did I change? Did anything really change in my life? And the only thing I could think of was, for the first time in my life, through the reading of the Quran and my initial experience of Islam, for the very first time in my life, and I know this might seem strange to you, but for the first time in my life I experienced or felt and came to believe in what I can only describe as love. Because when I read that Quran, I felt a love, a mercy, a forgiveness, a compassion, all the things that I no longer wanted to believe in. I felt it in a way that was more real and more powerful and more true to me than the very ground I'm standing on right now. And somehow, through feeling that, it opened a door of mine towards those feelings that I had shut long, long ago. I just felt such a power, such a beauty, such a caring through my first experiences of Islam and through my study of the Quran that it's impossible to describe. Believe it. When I read that Quran, it was a war inside me. I didn't want to trust again. I didn't want to love again. I didn't want to depend again. I didn't want to know mercy. I didn't want to know compassion. I just wanted to be left alone, to be buried in this earth someday, and to become long forgotten dust. But the Quran and God's calling just wouldn't let me. With all my imperfections, with all my humanity, He just wouldn't let me. And a Muslim, this isn't the end of my speech, but I will say this, that every convert knows that from the day he makes that choice, he is going to face that question again and again and again for the rest of his life. Why did you become a Muslim? Believe it, I was asked it 15 times yesterday. Why did you become a Muslim? And I just want to say this, that the simplest, truest answer that any convert could give, and every convert knows it, because there's so many ingredients that went into that even he or she can't really figure it out. Probably the best answer you could ever give, and I think it was the truest and sincerest, is that in one moment in our lives, a moment that we could have never foreseen in the past, a very special moment, God in His infinite mercy and kindness and goodness simply had mercy on us. Maybe He saw a need so great, a hurt so terrible, an emptiness so vast. Maybe He just saw a readiness. But in His mercy, He made it happen. As a new Muslim, I decided I needed to learn to pray. I wanted to learn to pray. The Quran mentions prayers. The Quran motivates you. I was desperate to know how. So I immediately, the day I became a Muslim, went to the Asr, Maghrib, and Isha prayer. The next day I went to the 5 prayers. The day after that, 5 prayers. I moved my apartment. I moved to an apartment very close to the masjid so I could make all 5 prayers. You have to remember, I was working on campus, so 3 of them were automatic anyway. Noon, Asr, Maghrib. But now the Fajr prayer was easy because it was only a few blocks from my house. The Isha prayer was also pretty easy to make. So day after day after day, I would be going to the prayer. And I found that if discovering the Quran was like discovering love and compassion and mercy all over again, if it's like the intellectual, emotional experience of love, then the prayer for me was like the total expression of it. The prayer for me was like a divine embrace. It was intoxicating. It was beautiful. It was like nothing I ever experienced before. There were moments when I cried and sobbed so deeply when I prayed. It just was so moving. It took me heart and soul. One brother who saw that I used to come to the Fajr and the Maghrib and the Isha prayer day after day after day, said to me, "Brother, take it easy. I mean, why do you come to these prayers? The recitation is in Arabic. They're a little bit longer than the others. So you have to stand there longer. It's in a language foreign to you. And especially since it's in a language foreign to you, why do you possibly come? When you don't even really, cannot even translate what you're hearing right away." And I told him, "I don't know, brother," but I just responded just instinctively. I told him, how come is a baby comforted by his mother's voice? He doesn't understand the words, but somehow it's a voice he's always known in a distant past, and that's always known him. When he hears it, even though he doesn't understand it word by word, he gets the feeling, and he gets the emotion, and he gets the comfort. There were other features of going to the masjid that were also extremely important to me. For one thing, in the masjid I could see Islam worked out and implemented on a community level. This was extremely important. We would fight and argue about issues and try to work out an Islamic lifestyle in America. It was like going through the Hijra all over again, when the Muslims had to face this challenge and that challenge, and we would get out our books and we would read and research and deal with this problem and that problem, and I could see it on a community level and then listen to the Quran. This was a powerful experience and a great learning experience. Quran was a place of learning for me. I mean, the masjid. I would listen to the discussions we'd have and go back into the libraries and dig out volumes and volumes and volumes in Tabari's history and Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, go through, look up the works of Ibn Taymiyyah, the great four scholars of these, four great scholars, most of whose works have been translated into English, legal scholars, and dig through those. And we would discuss and discuss and discuss. And in that supercharged intellectual environment, I was able to learn a lot. It was a real growing experience. And the masjid was even more than that. It was a place of refuge for me. A place where I could go and get away and get my spiritual balance again. And it was also a place of tremendous peace and support. Community support. For me, the masjid was my life. Well, a couple of years later, I got married to a lady from Saudi Arabia. And as the dean said, I think I'm the only male American Muslim, blonde-haired, blue-eyed professor that's ever accomplished that. I didn't realize it was such a big thing then, but now I do. It was a beautiful experience. My wife and I would drag her to the masjid quite often. And it was just a wonderful experience to have my wife there and the two of us committed to God and to each other in the masjid night after night, listening to the beauty and the power of God's call to mankind. It was like something I always wanted but never thought I could have. Never even thought existed. And then we began having children, one right after another. A year later we had our first child, Jamila. Telephone. And it wasn't long before, there we were, Jamila. I was holding her in my arms, and my wife was in the masjid, and we were all praying together with the brothers. My wife was the only female there, and Jamila. And then a year later, Sarah came. And then it was Jamila and Sarah, Jamila crawling around by my legs, and Sarah in my arms. And then about a year and a half later, 2 years, Fatin came. And then it was Fatin in my arms, and Sarah and Jamila clinging to my legs. And that was just... I couldn't have asked for more. That was the greatest moment in my life. But little by little, we ran into trouble. When my wife and my children began coming to the masjid, my daughters, a lot of the other ladies in our community became anxious to come, especially the American converts. And a lot of women started coming to the masjid. Not a real lot, but 4, 5, 6, and it became an issue in our community. A lot of brothers really, for one reason or another, just didn't like it. One time, and it mushroomed in all sorts of ways. One time, 2 ladies, a daughter, well, she was a student actually at the university I was teaching, and her mother came to the masjid to ask about Islam. They were actually interested, maybe possibly in converting. They came to our masjid, knocked on the door, the brother opened it, saw 2 women there, and slammed it in their face. They walked away and they never considered Islam again. One of the brothers just got really infuriated by the fact that my wife and my daughters and all these other ladies were coming to the masjid, even though they were praying in the back line, in the usual sort of the universal style. He threatened one time in a loud voice in the masjid that if he saw another woman in the mosque ever, he would personally throw them out bodily. Well, my wife ignored it, but a new American convert didn't. She had only been a Muslim for about 4 or 5 weeks. She took the brothers seriously and she left her religion. And today she's a Buddhist. These sort of problems would continue to arise as time went on. My wife just became more and more reluctant. She got tired of going. She preferred to pray at home. She didn't want to have to deal with that. My children kept coming with me for a while, but strangely enough, little by little, they got the impression that the mosque was not friendly to women. I'm not saying it's true, brothers and sisters. I'm not saying it's a fact. But I'm saying it's the way a normal American person is going to perceive it. I remember once my oldest daughter, when she was 5 or 6 years old, said to me, "Daddy, why aren't women allowed in the masjid?" I told her they are. I mean, if you go back to the earliest days of Islam, if you read through Sahih Bukhari, I mean, you have constantly are having hadith reports where the reports are coming from the courtyard in Medina and women are present. I said they were there. They were an active and integral part of the Muslim community. You could go almost every other page, or I'd say at least every third page. There's a report involving a woman in the masjid in one capacity or another, or during a Friday prayer speech where the Prophet and his companion and Bilal go and collect charity donations from the women in their section, and just on and on. I don't want to go through the details, but I told her, frankly, I don't know how it got that way, Jamila, but it did. But to me, when I read the sources of Islam, I just don't see it that way. Maybe I'm blinded by my American point of view. Maybe I'm reading my culture into the facts that I'm reading, but I just didn't see the mosque as an unfriendly place to women in the early days of Islam. I tried to look up the earliest scholarly books I could find to see what the scholars thought in those days. I mean, did Abu Hanifa, did he have an attitude that discouraged women from the mosque, or Imam Malik from participating in the community? And of course, the oldest legal text I could find was Imam Malik's text, the Muwatta. That's really the oldest one that we have that actually comes from the author himself. You know, all the ones from Abu Hanifa are developed by his students later on and stuff, and his students' recollections of things come to us. But we actually have Imam Malik's actual production. And in it, he never seems to indicate that women shouldn't be in our masjids or play a part in our community. As a matter of fact, I remember once he was in one section on the etiquette of eating, towards the latter part of the Muwatta. It's been translated in English. How he mentioned that there's no problem with Muslim families sitting together. He said, for example, there's no problem with a woman dining in the company of men as long as her male guardian is present. And I thought, well, my God, I mean, how did it get this way? Imam Malik says this is the sunnah of the people in Medina. In those days, that early stage of law, they didn't... Imam Shafi'i developed the idea of the Prophet's sunnah exclusively, but in the earlier days, in Imam Malik's time, later part of the 2nd century after the Hijrah, he was talking about, you know, this is the way that our community has always done things. They used to refer to the standard established practice. So I wonder, what's going on here? I know that my Muslim brothers and sisters are not wrong, so to speak. I know that there's good reason for things the way they are, but somehow I saw a tremendous not tremendous incongruity, but definitely something I just, to this day, I have always had difficulty understanding. But it penetrated and it hurt me most deeply one day when I was driving my daughter and my other 2 children, along with the neighbor's daughter, to school. And the neighbor's daughter said to mine, Jamila, what church do you go to? Jamila didn't answer her immediately. I don't know why. And then the little girl began, well, I go to my church. And my church is a very nice church, and it's over here. And my mommy and daddy and I, we go every Sunday, and we sit there, and we worship together. And I love my church, and my church is one of the most best things in my life. And she kept on talking about my church, my church, my church, my church. And what a central part that was in her life. And then she asked Jamila, what's your church? And Jamila responded, my daddy goes to the mosque. See, by that time my children, because of their perception of things, they no longer wanted to go to the masjid. And I was now going alone. But in my daughter's mind, that masjid wasn't her masjid. It was Daddy's masjid. This little girl had her church. But my daughter, her experience of Islam was through her parents, period. And I felt deeply hurt. I felt deeply hurt because the experience I had, the integral part that masjid played in my life, the beauty I had known, the music of the Quran that I had heard, that call from heaven that had touched me so deeply when I heard it so many times, like a mother's voice. my daughter will never really know. Or at least that's a possibility. And it hurt. When I went to Saudi Arabia to teach, I took my daughters to Mecca and Medina. And they loved it. Because we went as a family. And they saw my wife and I and their uncles and their grandma, they're all sitting together, and we would go there and drink water from Zemzem, the well, and we would eat some tamis, which is my favorite, that baked bread, that Afghani bread, and some fool and hummus or whatever, and we would sit there, and then when we were done, we would clean things up, and we'd sit and talk together and laugh and joke, and the call to prayer would be made, and we, like every other family there, men would go into their sections, the women would go into their sections. We'd hear the most beautiful recitation of the Quran, which echoes up to the heavens in Mecca. It seems to reach clear on up to the sky. And we would listen to that, and my children just used to love that experience. Daddy, when are we going back to the Kaaba? When are we going back to Mecca? When are we going? And we went many, many times. And they made Umrah with me. Well, they just followed me along. And they thought that was such a cool experience. And that was the saddest part about leaving Saudi Arabia, because when I left Saudi Arabia behind, there were a lot of things I was happy to leave behind. But I knew I was leaving behind an experience for them that they so desperately needed. And for some reason or another, couldn't have in America. I don't know why it is, but that's the way it is. I think that it's had harmful effects on our community. And I don't think it just has harmful effects on the Muslim converts. When I was in Arabia, I noticed some very disturbing things. And I don't know, I'm not complaining, I'm not criticizing anybody, but I just hope this doesn't infect our community anymore. When I was there, for example, we'd all be at the beach, all the faculty. There'd be 400 Muslims along the beach with their families. The call to prayer would sound, the Asr prayer, Maghrib prayer. 99% of those Muslim men, I would even say 100%, got up when that sound of prayer was called, and they would go to the masjid and go attend the prayer. And I'm sad to say that maybe 5, 6 women got up and went. Now, I don't think women are less religious than men, because I grew up in a Christian background, and the women, by far, are the most intensely religious in the Christian community. And in many other religious communities as well. I don't think women are less inclined towards spirituality than men. But for some reason, I don't know what it is, women felt less inclined to go to the masjid. Almost as if they didn't feel like it was really theirs, like my daughter said. Why aren't women allowed in the masjid? Who knows? These are just reflections. I'm not making an argument. I'm just presenting perspective. I don't want to get into a long argument about fiqh. You could have Dr. Jamal Bedawi do that. Brother Hamid just asked me to explain my ups and downs, the positives and the negatives. These days, my biggest worry is about the future of my children, their religiosity. This is my biggest worry and biggest concern. And I've had to take some drastic measures to do something about it. I mean, the Quran says to us, as parents, as believers, save yourselves and your families from a fire whose fuel is men and stones. Save yourselves. And I have to save my children. As I say, I want to go to paradise, but I want to bring my children with me. And inshallah, I hope we make it. But in any case, so what I'm doing is I decided to do 2 things. Through 3 of the prayers, I have to pray at school. I got to pray at school because I'm at work then. But for the Fajr and Isha prayer, I could be at home. So I try to be home during those prayers to lead my family in the prayers, night after night after night. So my children, if they can't experience or don't feel comfortable in the institutions of our community, at least will feel comfortable in the institution of our family and feel affected by the religion there. If that's the only closest thing they could have to the type of experience I had, I have to do my best to grant them that. It does mean that I might have to miss going to the masjid as much as I would like, as much as I would long to. But my children also have needs, and I have to take into consideration my daughters. Another thing, since they don't have the learning experiences I had, they don't have the same opportunities I had for learning, I sit with them right now 2 nights a week, and we just read through the Quran. We begin at the beginning. We've already begun. We're moving through it, one passage at a time. As my daughter Jamila says, Daddy, at this rate, we're going to not finish it for 2 years. That's okay, I said. Just ask whatever questions you have. Let's go along the way. And invariably, I'll read a passage, and they'll talk for an hour, asking me questions. What does this mean? What does worship mean? What does sealing the hearts mean? How does that happen? Why does God do this? Etc., etc., etc. Sometimes I don't have an answer, but I at least want to get them thinking and discussing and living up here in their mind the religion, not just in the form of prayer when I pray. I want them to have those dual channels of faith that I was so lucky to experience as a Muslim convert, male convert. I'll end by just simply saying this. My brothers and sisters, I know I sort of ended this on a pessimistic note. I am truly worried about the future of my children. I know that many of the Muslim brothers and sisters are confident that they will do just fine with theirs, growing up here in America. I could be exaggerating in my own mind. It could be because of my background. It could be because of my Americanness. But I seem to perceive dangers that they don't seem to think even exist. The other day I was reading a book by a famous Western scholar who's very sympathetic to Islam. And he quoted Muslim studies in America. Objective Muslim studies, thesis studies and whatnot. And one study said that of second-generation Muslims born in America, or the next generation, not the immigrant generation, but the generation that comes after that, or the generation that comes after the convert, that generation, according to studies by Muslim scholars and Western scholars, at least 50% have no connection with the religious community whatsoever within one generation after the immigrant generation. I don't know. It seems like, at least from what I could see, our brothers and sisters are doing fine. But maybe I'm always around the most religious and committed brothers and sisters. They said by the next generation, and these studies were also done in Europe, where there's many more generations to study even. By the next generation, 90%. No connection with the community whatsoever. What was the word they used? Completely ostracized themselves from the mosque. And not only that, but their lifestyle shows no signs of any religion whatsoever. It shows no commitment to any particular religion. They may acknowledge that there's a supreme being, but not much more than that. I've heard similar concerns raised by Muslim youth at the Maya conference. Constantly hear them talk about the great numbers of their fellow Muslim youth that are astray from their religion. The tremendous number that seem to be away from it. I hear about this all the time. But yet, when I see speeches by our older members of our community, they seem to either be unaware of it or seem to feel that they can have found a solution to the problem. I wish they would share it with me, because I am deathly worried. I'm deathly worried. When I hear our children at the Maya conference calling out to us with such statistics and alarm, I feel it's a call for help. And I don't see where we're doing much to help them. I don't think we're taking seriously their hurts, their desires, their needs, the conflicts that they face, the obstacles that they face, the burdens that they have to live with. I don't think we're listening. But in any case, like I said, I don't want to end on a completely pessimistic note. We'll do what we can. If I can't appeal to the community for help, then I'll do the best I can alone. I love my children. They mean everything to me. And we can never give up on them. And I'm not bitter. Sometimes I think to myself that I wish that I could have become a Muslim 30 years from now, when Islam is well established in the States, and the majority of Muslims are also American Muslims. Might make things a little easier. But then I think again, and I'm glad that Allah has chosen to make me a Muslim during this very difficult time, because with the greater the hardship, I hope and I think the greater the reward if we respond to it correctly. And yes, it's been difficult at times. There have been tears of joy and tears of frustration and tears of spiritual cleansing. But all in all, I am grateful to God for having made me a Muslim. And secondarily, I am grateful to all my Muslim brothers and sisters who have tolerated and been patient with my peculiar and sometimes strange point of view, who gave me the opportunity to share with you my perceptions, even though I know that sometimes they differ very much with yours, who gave me the chance to learn and to experience this faith on a community level in a very intimate and involved way. And I suppose my only regret, if I had one, is that my daughters might not share that same experience that I had. But, ultimately all of us Muslims have to never lose faith and trust in Allah, and we have to always be confident that that the way Allah does things is always for the best, even though it may not seem that obvious to us. And with that, my fellow and much loved fellow believers, may Allah's peace and mercy be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wasn't that a wonderful lecture? Takbir. Takbir. What we'd like to do now is to go into our second session, which would entertain questions and answers. And the format which we would like to do is to have people come to the microphones either at the center aisle here or at the far left here. And what I'd like for you to do is, if you have a question, please identify who you are and if you're affiliated with any organization, and ask your question. If you have a comment to make, please make your comments extremely brief, a couple minutes, and so we can move along and give those of you who have questions, that we can get everybody an opportunity to ask them. So with that, I see a gentleman over here. Please go ahead. Walaikum salam.
First of all, could you go over the format again, what you want me to do? If I have a comment or question or what?
Yeah, you can go ahead and ask a question if you'd like. I just would like each of you to just state your name and if you're affiliated with a particular organization.
My name is Amir Al-Rahim, and I'm a Muslim affiliated with all the Muslims in North America. I have strong feeling to what Brother Jeffrey said. In fact, I couldn't believe that somebody could explain my feeling the way Brother Jeffrey did. Maybe I took a few steps further than what you did. First of all, I have to say the experience you faced with your children as a convert is not unique or alone. We all face similar. I know so many families or Muslim families move across the continent in search of to do something toward their future generation. I have to say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala order you, make amr, that you give the amana, and I don't think first really explain the amana to its people. And the statistic you made in the first generation, 50%, I think it's exaggerated. I'm living right now, I left my profession to do exactly some of your concern right now, and I'm living like a real nomad, without a camel, by the way. And the statistic by no means is more than 10%. Those who have good affiliation with the mosque. I don't want to, I have to comply with the format that I have to be brief. I'd like to sit with Brother Jeffrey, and in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped us to do a whole unique organization. It's not Islamic organization, but working with all Islamic organizations as a group, self-financed, to do something for the future of our generation. Only one thing, the education. We think we are giving our children education. Basically, what we are doing, we are torturing our children. And the statistic, the fact, speaks for itself. And may Allah help us to wake up and do something. Jazakumullah khairan.
Thank you very much. Wa alaikum salam. While he's fixing the mic, I just...
I just appreciate the comment. Yeah, that statistic is just one of many I've heard. They all seem to end up being around that. Some ways you might be right. That could be based more on the European experience than the American experience, or they might be combining their studies. I think that from my own experience, just by eye, I've noticed, for example, when I was in California, when I was in San Francisco, they told us that we have a Muslim community there of 13,000. But the actual number of Muslims that attended the Friday prayer or were active in the community was just a couple of hundred. So, in Kansas City we have several thousand Muslims living there, residents, American Muslims. And participation in the masjid community is extremely small. So, and by the next generation, it seems that the children almost have no real inclination towards going to the masjid or being involved in the religion. But, maybe here in Tulsa you have a very strong community. It also depends on the activities of the community, I think, the commitment of the community, even the educational background of the community and economic background. In San Francisco, we had a hugely vast number of poor Muslim immigrants, and I mean almost dirt poor. And in Kansas City, well, the population is somewhat different. But in any case, I think a lot of that depends on that. I've seen in the European studies, for example, the majority of European Muslim immigrants are laborers. I think that their situation is quite a bit more difficult than, say, the position of immigrants who are professionals. And really, I think America has gained tremendously from the brain drain from the Middle Eastern Muslim countries. But Europe has gotten mostly a labor population. But I did notice in the big cities where our Muslim communities seem to have the greatest populations, Chicago, Detroit, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Kansas City, Indianapolis, where there's a large number of Muslims who are struggling financially and maybe don't have the same educational background as some of our professionals, it does seem that this problem might weight a little greater there. But that's, again, I'm not sure. That would be an interest. I would like to see what sort of studies you're doing and how's it going along. I would love to be proven different. And then we could analyze and figure out what we could do to even improve that. But I appreciate your comments. They're really good.
Yes, go ahead.
Alaikum salam.
I'm taking responsibility for Islam Center,
Can you speak up just a little bit, please?
Okay. I'm new convert to Islam for about the last year, and I spent this last year in deep study strengthening my knowledge, understanding, and acceptance of Islam. I've studied religion all of my life. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, I deliberately gave up my career ambitions in order to study the truth as I continue to work and write areas of it. I think my time that my chosen profession very, very important to me. As far as I'm concerned, Jeffrey, what you said today is extremely emotional. I know that you gave it perhaps rather unemotionally, but I felt it emotionally. I think most of us here did. I have children that are not living with me. Their mother and I was not living together since before I came to Islam. In that household, I've been concerned for their safety or somewhat because she was a violent individual from the inner city. However, she stood for them, and I'm finding that as my sons come with me to the masjid, she exhibits varying degrees of resistance letting them come. And their home life with her is good. She's a good mother, and it's probably not that much different from what Muslim young people experience in their own homes with their own mothers, except for perhaps what she's teaching them with regard to religion, because she goes to my father's church, the church that my father pastors. He's a Southern Baptist minister. And so there's a pull on my children in this regard. At any rate, the biggest pull I do not feel is probably, I don't feel that the pull is primarily between Christianity and Islam, but between Allah and the idol that they worship in the home. She set up an idol in the home that they worship pretty incessantly. And in Christianity, we were warned about this idol. We have prophecies from Isa, since leading to John the disciple, that there would be an idol called an image of the beast that they would worship incessantly. And it would cause them to begin to think and do like them, put a mark, as it said, in their forehead and in their right hand. In the Old Testament, they were told to wear the mark of Allah in their forehead and their right hand. They began to wear scripture and going to front us on the forehead and right hand, but that's not what they meant. They meant that causing them to think and do like what Allah commanded. So the mark of the beast that they're talking about, in my opinion, is the mark of the beast inside of Daniel and Revelation outline. And this mark is caused by worshiping the image of the beast that speaks. In my opinion, we put a golden calf into the home and set it up in front of our families. It would be a great outcome, especially if this golden calf began to speak and move. And if this golden calf began to transform itself into beautiful landscapes, or beautiful women, or beautiful men, or a variety of stories that we could watch, I would think that that golden calf would become very, very worshipful.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but because of the lack of time, I would appreciate if you can finish up your point or ask a question.
At any rate, I believe that we're setting up an idol in our home called the television, which is an image of this beast society that they're trying to create. And we're leaving our women and children at home to watch it while we go to the masjid. This is very serious. I also, I'm appalled at the idea that there are Muslim men who are still outraged at women coming to the masjid. And I approach this question both with knowledge of the deed and sunnah as well as just an American perspective. And it's, obviously almost an unforgivable sin, especially when a man can incur the wrath of Allah in all probability for destroying the faith of a Muslim woman and allowing her to, become turned Buddhist as a result of what he said. We've got to be serious here in America about what we're doing, what we're saying. We have to be more serious than the Christians and the Jews because they've lost. All of their conservative families have lost their children. I've seen it over the last 30, 40 years. I was born in 1952, and I've seen a great deal of change in Christian societies that have allowed television into their homes, that have kept the teaching of Prophet Isa, peace be upon him, that they still did have. And I'm saying that it can happen to us. Allah can choose different people, we're told. And I just want to encourage our brothers and sisters to help us find the answers and help us identify the problems. Staying clear and to not let these things happen to our women, our children, or ourselves. And one of the first things we have to remove from our home are the idols that we give our undivided attention to, or another word, worship. And other than that, we have to be serious about the Sunnah. And the Sunnah does not tell us that the women are not supposed to...
I'm sorry, sir.
We have to preach it comes from us. And we have to take down the walls. That's not Sunnah. And we have to return to the Sunnah, not only worldwide, but particularly here in the United States where we are. This is where our responsibility is. We're struggling all over the world to return to the Sunnah. And here where we've come together from all our nationalities, we have an abundant opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And I'd like to once again remind that because of lack of time, if you don't have a question, just please make your comments brief. Thank you very much. I have a question here I guess came from the sister section, and I don't see any, I noticed that there's no sisters behind this podium, but I would encourage you to ask your questions, or otherwise give them to me on a card if you can. The question is, what advice would you give to the young third-generation parents, meaning parents who've been raised here in America, who have immigrant parents, and who are now, after they see how their parents struggled through Islam, and how they see their experiences with Minna and so forth, what advice do you give to them as opposed to different advice you would give to their parents?
Oh, third-generation Muslims?
I think it would be really second-generation.
Second generation that are parents of children? Are there people like that in this audience? Oh, that's interesting. I think well, like I said, it's sort of an individual struggle of mine. I would advise sort of the same thing that the same type of thing I'm doing at home. I think it's proved to be very good. This 2 Quran or Islamic studies programs we have every week. Originally I told them it would be 15 minutes, but they liked it so much they won't let me go. They keep me there an hour each program. And those discussions are very important. I want my children to learn what's in the Quran. And I'd like to get them involved in the prayers. I think if we could get them that's how every convert starts, right? The Quran and the prayers. Once you get those going, then you get motivated to do so much else. And that's exactly how I got this idea with my wife. We were sitting and talking one day, and I'm thinking, I said to her, I'm worried about our children. I mean, what is going to make them be real Muslims? What's even going to motivate them? What's going to happen to them? They just think prayers is some sort of exercise that mommy and daddy go through, and that they sometimes participate long, up and down, up and down. I remember my daughter was explaining it to a friend of hers. Yes, her friend got nervous when they saw myself and my wife praying. Her friend, and she said, no, it's okay, watch. They're going to go up, and they're going to go down, and up. But to them, it's sort of like a physical thing, and, it doesn't have the same meaning to them. I really was worried, so I told my wife, now wait a minute, let me try to think. I wasn't born a Muslim. I was born in a non-Muslim culture. I was confronted with all these influences. What worked for me to motivate me to get involved in this faith and to work at it? Well, the Quran. I read the Quran. By the time I was through, I was desperate to do whatever was necessary to get more of the feeling and the beauty and the power that Islam has to give to us. So I started praying and et cetera, and then I did this and I did that and I got more books and I learned. But it began with the Quran. So I said, let's begin with the Quran. And that's what we do. We take them through it very carefully, very patiently, very slowly. And we encourage them to pray with us. And this seems to be really it's amazing. I know it sounds trite and simple, but it's beautiful the effect it seems to be having. I'm really encouraged. I'll let you know the next time I come down here how it's working out. If it fails, I think it's only going to be because I get lazy. Because the children, they seem to have an unquenchable thirst. And they're still at that age when they're anxious to to know what daddy thinks. 10 years from now, they'll think daddy doesn't know anything. If they're, or at least typical American children don't. But right now they're very anxious to know what I think. What are my ideas? What do I write about? What do I think about? And we get in very lengthy and in-depth discussions, and they exhaust me sometimes. So I would encourage that. I would encourage that regardless of what generation we are. I mean, I'm even worse off than you guys are. I'm of no generation. I mean, I'm just a convert.
Yes. Yep.
Revert, as they like to say, but I prefer convert because most Americans can relate to that concept quickly.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir.
Islam.
One of the things I like to do is to invite people to Islam. Every time I try to do this, I face up with the question of if Islam is a social purifier, how come there is so much impurity in Middle East, and there is a chaotic world out there? Jazakumullah.
Oh, thank you. If Islam is such a social purifier, then why is there such impurity in the Middle East? Well, I don't know. There's impurity everywhere, you know. I mean, in the West and in the Middle East. I mean, God could reveal His guidance to mankind, but He's not going to force you to follow it. You know. I think you're probably referring maybe to the political corruption that exists there, the corruption that I found, for example, when I try to do business in the Middle East. You have to, I mean, if you don't, or if you're not ready to give bribes and to use connections and take advantage of certain situations, you know, you're going to really get frustrated trying to do business there. At least I did. But I think that corruption exists. The human being himself is potentially corruptible. We all are. And societies are no different than people. To the degree they follow God's guidance, that will determine how pure that society is. Just, I'd see no difference between people or societies. I think that, I mean, honestly, I've talked to many, many brothers from the Middle East about Islam, and you'll be surprised at this, all of you sitting here, because you seem like deeply committed Muslims, but I find that most of them have never even read the Quran. I mean most. And this is not 55%. I mean most. I've had brothers come up to me after I've given a lecture and said, you know, I think I'm going to read that Quran. You know? I've never read it before. I don't even know what's in it. You know? Or I talk to people from the Middle East and they'll tell me something from their culture and tell me it's in the Quran. You know, in the Quran we believe this or that, or the Quran teaches. And I'm thinking, I read the Quran many, many times. I never said that. I don't think that's there. Ah, well. So, you know, I think that the people are quite ignorant of what their religion teaches. Honestly, I think that's much true. I don't think Middle Easterners are much different than Americans in that regard. Most Americans have very little knowledge of what Christianity teaches or represents. I think I found this even to be more true of Buddhists and Hindus, etc. And I think Muslims are similar. You know, most of them really have not made much of an effort to learn. I think when they do, you could see a transformation take place in their life. So let's just hope our communities work harder at it, at obtaining knowledge. Thank you for the question.
I've got a question here. Question is, I'm a high school student. I meet teachers and students every day that seem like potential Muslims. What is your advice on how to approach these people without seeming pushy, so that they're drawn away instead of coming toward Islam?
Yeah, just try not to be too pushy. I don't know. You know what we do in our family, and this seems to help. This is just personal advice. I certainly wouldn't want to hold myself up as a model. But this is just as one Muslim to another. I would, what we do, our family does, is when the Eid comes, we bring cookies to school, children dress up, they bring gifts to the teachers, etc. When Christmas comes, we always have to explain to them that we don't celebrate Christmas, that this is not one of our religious holidays. Our children do not want to draw Santa Clauses. Our children do not want to stuff stockings. Could you please give them another activity? And we do it very politely and very patiently. When Ramadan comes, we explain to them that, you know, on the weekends at least, because our children are 6 years old, 5 years old, we let them fast part of the day. that we hope in the future our children they're gonna make room for our children to pray, etc., etc. We're in constant dialogue with the teachers. We don't tell them, I want you to believe in Islam. We tell them that what we believe, what's important to us, and would you please try to accommodate our needs as Muslims. And we'd like to celebrate, we'd like to share with you some of the humanitarian, social positives of our faith. Like sharing with people our celebration of, giving them cookies, if they would so choose, when Ramadan comes, etc. Right? And things like this. I found that through that continuous communication, they became extremely interested in Islam. Once you show that you're willing and ready to represent your faith and talk about it without asking them to embrace it, and you use such opportunities like the ones I just mentioned, and we need to do that anyway, to express your religious point of view. They're very anxious, not all of them, but many of them are very anxious to know more. And so I know now that every member of my daughter's school has asked me or my wife for a copy of a book I wrote. And many of them have asked for preprints of my second book. And some of the teachers have come to me and asked for a reading list about Islam. One teacher told me that she loves the religion very much, but she hasn't reconciled the idea with her parents, etc. But the point of it is that just try to be a Muslim. Stick up for what you believe in. Don't be shy about expressing what your needs and what your desires are as a Muslim. And I think people will naturally want to communicate with you. If you make it look like you're trying to sell them something, no. But if you just make it, this is part of my life, it's an important part of my life, so extremely important that I want you to be aware of this and that so that you will not violate things that are important to me, then people are quite anxious to find out what you believe, because they don't feel threatened in that context. They feel that you're coming to them, you're being upfront with them, you're trying to get a certain type of response from them as far as your needs go, so they're quite willing to discuss them. I found this is a very effective way to open the subject of Islam with people.
Okay, and we'll take 2 more questions from that side.
Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Lang, the question I have is related with your last night's lecture, and you briefly mentioned about the Eastern philosophies of Taoism and Buddhism. And as I understand, you can draw a parallel between these two between the philosophy of Islam and the philosophy between these Eastern philosophies. Now, you said that the only thing that was missing from these philosophies were the concept of God. I was wondering what exactly is the factor that necessitates the introduction of the concept of God, while those goals are already being met with those philosophies.
Well, I can't say what matters for all people as far as that goes. I can only speak about me personally, why that was such an important concept. Like I was just saying today, I grew up with a very pessimistic, cynical view of life. And I thought that there was no God. And that because of that, there was no such thing as virtue or justice or anything like this. Okay? So this was my feeling. So, when I studied those Eastern philosophies, I thought these are nice programs of living. These are nice, balanced philosophies. When I studied them from a philosophical standpoint, I felt that they preach many of the universal golden rule that all religions seem to advocate. But if they couldn't convince me that the idea of God was not in itself a contradiction, or if they just obscured that issue entirely, then there was no need for me to change my perception. You see what I mean?
I understand.
If there's no God, and they have a nice idea or way of thinking about living, or a nice sort of formula for living, that's great.
So,
first of all, I know most people aren't going to follow it. Second, there's tremendous suffering in the world. It's not going to relieve it, because most people won't do it. The only thing that's going to make most people, change their way of living is because they believe they have to. And the only concept in religion that's going to force people to reform themselves and to kill themselves to live a better life and to strive to do that is because they have something at stake You see what I mean? And for me, that would be the idea of God. Without that, these would be just nice systems, but frankly, there's no reason why I should go to it. I already have. I didn't think I was a terrible person. I didn't think that, but frankly, for me, if there was no God, this is just a nice invention by human beings. Could work for some, couldn't work for others. No reason really to get very into it. Not only that, they're from a foreign culture. I couldn't adopt that foreign culture's perspective. Why should I bother? I'm not American. It's like asking me to adopt I'm not arguing with you. It would be like asking me to adopt Nietzsche's perspective. Well, I mean, that was his idea. It has some compelling features. It has some flaws, but why really waste the time? You can't base your life on somebody else's opinions. So without God, it's just another man's opinion, or a people's opinion, something they formulated, and fine. There's no major reason why I should be compelled to embrace it. You see, so if a religion really couldn't come to terms squarely with the idea of a God, right, a creator, a source for the existence of this universe and our being here, I just wasn't moved. I felt it was nice, but there was no major reason to embrace it. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Bad. I am from Houston, Texas, and I'm associated with Darul Arqam full-time school. I am the superintendent. Thanks for Dr. Lang for his presentation. I really was listening to him with two thinking in the same time. One of them is from the point of adult education, how he himself developed the attitude of learning and exploring, maybe without a hafiz or without a sheikh, or taking himself an attitude of the way an adult should teach himself or should learn. This is the way I was listening to him. This is my personal perception. The second one, as a person involved in child education, who really will be listening, be very attentive to the needs of the child. To make my point clear, we went through a long process in Houston to materialize the full-time school. Everybody blamed us why we don't have a full-time school, but once we developed full-time school, I found the response is not as it was expected. And we met a lot of problems from the adults, from the mothers, and from the rich. The rich said that we cannot give you our children because your school is not that fancy, as good as the public school system. And that was one solution, even though we have beautiful mosques, alhamdulillah. The mothers and the fathers were unable to convince their children because they're already out of their hand. The kids no longer listen to their children, to their parents, because that's the way they've been brought up. They left them for some time, that to the point that even the parents started to fight with each other because one wants to take the kids to the school, the other doesn't want because the school has yet to be tested. I think the point I'm driving to is the problem we are facing is not in children education, it is in adult education. I feel strongly, after going through this experience in Houston, that the way we teach adults is no different the way we teach children. All of us as adults became very dependable on the sheikh and on the hafiz. We cancel our minds. We became, sorry to say, puppets in many ways. The first negligence that we will be accountable for is the education of our daughters, the education of our wives and our sisters. This is one of the most neglected. I come every time to the lecture and learn, and my wife will go to the babysitting and take care of the children. Or, since the kids will cry all the time, they have to go outside. In another way, there is a major negligence. We have to put points someplace. I see the time is over. Thank you. I
Thank
just
you
want
very
to
much.
bring the attention of adult education, and I will use multiple null expression, the neglected species. It's very important.
Thank you very much. I do see a sister standing up here, so I'm going to allow her just either one question or a very brief comment under a minute.
I just have a very short little comment. Adding on to the list that Brother Lang gave about suggestions for the high schoolers, help give theology as teachers, a lot of schools are starting to add studies of the Arab nations or study of Islam into their social studies or history classes, or geography even. And teachers love to have speakers.
Right.
So as a parent or even as a student, offer to your teachers when you get to that subject to speak on it, for a
Yes.
day, and they would love it.
Yeah, you're right. My
Thank you.
wife gave a speech at my children's school already, and my daughters, Jamila and Sarah, each have given a speech on the meaning and purpose of Ramadan in Muslims' life. I mean, a little 6-year-old kid up there in front of the auditorium reading a speech. But, I wrote it for her. But in any case, she did a great job. The teachers were really impressed. After that speech, as a matter of fact, that's when they all asked for the book. So, you're right. That's a great advice. I missed it.
Well, with that comment, I'd like to thank Dr. Jeffrey Lang for coming to our conference and particularly to this session. And I just want to make a brief comment about what I believe some of his special qualities and contributions are to
Could I
Muslim
leave
Ummah
first?
here. Sorry. I just think that it's very, very important to have Dr. Lang's his own impression of what a Muslim goes through in terms of conversion, because many of us take our own religion and culture for granted simply because we developed it from our own parents. And to see somebody go through a spiritual transformation like he did just makes me feel like, wow, I wish I went through some of that, because I was just kind of born with it and I just kind of took it for granted. So I think that's very special. And also the point that he made about how family as a whole should study their religion and different aspects of Islam is so crucial, because oftentimes you send the kids to one place, the brothers and the parents go, or the adults go to this person, and the women sit at home. And I just think that it's very important that you pointed out that if you learn together as a family, it's very special, not only in terms of knowledge, but psychological and mental, because you feel as a family that you're developing. And I want to thank him for pointing that out. It's so important and crucial. Couple of comments. You've all received these comment forms here. Please fill them out. And what's more important is write the comments in which you think the conference or the session that you attended or saw could be improved, or the things that you didn't like and so forth. We would really appreciate them, so the next time we can learn from you. One final thing, Dr. Lang has written this book. It's out there on the tables. I'm not sure the price, but if you'd like, please purchase it and come over here and he can sign them for you. This is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to get a autograph. And we're going to have Zuhur prayer at 1:45, and then we'll break for lunch from 2 to 3:45, and the next session will be at 3:45 with Dr. Jamal Badawi. Thank you for attending, and brother here has one more announcement.
Assalamu alaikum. Many of our brothers and sisters asked about the food, and that
first one was I was an undergrad, a junior undergraduate, and every time I hear you, I have to give this book back. I didn't buy it, but every time I hear you speak, I always get something spiritual out of it, as opposed to say fiqh or something. And I appreciate that. I think that's very important for you to bring out issues such as women and be able to articulate this, because I think it's so true.
Well,
It really is, especially the family aspect. You know?
I always feel like I'm standing up here isolated and alone.
I think that, you ever hear the idea of the silent majority? I think you have the silent majority
I don't know.
aspect, so
They're not communicating to me.
continue to feel and speak out like that.